Hello, and welcome to a new episode of Moments in Credit Union History, sponsored by CUNA Mutual. And today, my guest is Don Davidson. No stranger to CUNA Mutual, he spent 37 years there. He retired as the Vice President of Credit Union System Relations, and he was the longest serving officer in the history of the organization. During his tenure at CUNA Mutual, Don held multiple leadership roles, including roles in claims, human resources, labor relations, direct sales, international development, and credit union system relations. In the last 10 years of his career, Don was responsible for the CUNA Mutual relationships with CUNA, leagues, corporate credit unions, and other strategic partners. It's safe to assume, I would say, that if the CUNA Mutual name was on it in the past 37 years, Don was somehow affiliated with it. Welcome to the show, Don.
Well, thank you very much, Stephanie. It's a pleasure to be here.
Happy to have you with us. So, as you know, CUNA Mutual is our sponsor. I kind of feel like you're pretty familiar with that. And your entire career was at CUNA Mutual, which I think is fabulous. So tell us a little bit about Don Davidson and CUNA Mutual.
Well, it's a story that kind of goes back to my childhood, due to a neighbor that lived next door to me who was one of the original executives at CUNA and CUNA Mutual both. Back in the day, in the 50s, there was a building called Feline House that was over on the east side of Madison. For those listeners, you're probably aware that when the Credit Union Act was passed in 1934, Roy Bergegren and Ed Feline selected Madison as the headquarters for the credit union movement in the United States. And it has since become the World Credit Union headquarters, where CUNA and CUNA Mutual are stationed along with the World Council of Credit Unions to promote the credit union movement throughout the world. And this neighbor who lived next door to me, Stephanie, was like a second father to me. I had a single mother. We didn't have a car. And so she kind of relied on Vaughn Liscombe, the gentleman I'm talking about, to get me to the emergency room when I needed stitches or all those good things that little kids get into trouble with. And so Vaughn was kind of like a father figure to me. And as I went through the University of Wisconsin's business school, I started to think, where am I going to start my career? And I always remembered Vaughn talking about his role, not only at CUNA as originally an executive there, but then over to CUNA Mutual, where he was in charge of our claims operation. And so I had two offers waiting for me when I graduated. One was with CUNA Mutual, and the other one was with Oscar Myers, the hot dog purveyor. I saw myself more of a cooperator than a hot dog purveyor, and so I went with CUNA Mutual. And 37 years later, I retired from that company with a lot of pride. What I wanted to talk to you a little bit about was living through that growth period of the 70s and 80s. When I was hired in 1973, it was a tremendous growth period. Not only for credit unions, but CUNA Mutual going hand in hand, as well as CUNA, to grow the credit union movement. And I'd like your group to kind of think about the business model that existed in the credit union movement back then. Reflect on the fact that going back to 1935 up to about the 50s and 60s and 70s, there was a lot of occupationally based credit unions. In fact, there was about 25,000 of them around the United States. And they had about 25 million credit union members by the mid to latter part of the 70s. Now, when you think about that from a metric standpoint, that means there's like about one credit union for every 1,000 credit union members. Very occupationally based. People knew each other in that credit union. There were credit committees where you were judged on your character on the factory floor, as opposed to some FICO score that didn't exist back then. And so we were evolving from that kind of occupationally based credit union to what we have today with community-based credit unions. And to think about some of today's metrics, we're approaching getting down to around 5,000 credit unions. I don't know the exact number now, but it's 5,000 or 6,000 credit unions, 100 to maybe 120 million credit union members. So instead of one credit union for every 1,000 members, today we've got one credit union for every 200 or 20,000 members on a community basis. So what does that mean from a business standpoint? when you think about serving 20,000 members as opposed to 1,000 that are all located centrally on a factory floor. And you get to the major strategy issues that faced CUNA and CUNA Mutual back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, trying to evolve from a very institutionally based customer to a member strategy where we're embracing those millions of members and trying to sell product to them. CUNA at the time was ramping up. They were selling share drafts and then credit cards and mortgages. And CUNA Mutual at the same time was evolving from its original products, which were a loan protection product to cover the loan for death or disability, and a share product to provide life insurance on the amount of shares that an individual had in their credit union, to really a full-fledged insurance company where we were selling everything that you would typically see today, from auto and home to life insurance to investments and so on. And so the issue really became, how do you move your whole distribution and business model to serve those many members? And the key became the leagues. The leagues were an important part of the fact that there had to be distribution beyond just the salespeople from CUNA Mutual and the limited number of salespeople at CUNA, and the leagues became a distribution arm for both of our organizations. And so when I think about the credit union system, which I was responsible for, I think about that tight-knit group of CUNA, CUNA Mutual, and leagues expanding coverage in products throughout the United States, and I'll talk in a few minutes about expanding it throughout the world. So that was an important part of credit union history that came out of Madison, Wisconsin, the importance of those centralized organizations to take these products and distribute them throughout the country and eventually throughout the world. In about, I believe it was 1995, I was asked to move from my role as a vice president in sales and marketing to our international development side of the equation. And back at that time, we had a new CEO that had come into CUNA Mutual. He worked with Dan MICUH, who you just interviewed. And Dan and Mike Kitchen were extremely busy in trying to grow this movement even further. And in the international area, we were trying to leverage our business model throughout the world. At that point in time, we had 65 countries that CUNA Mutual served and tried to sell insurance in. Now, we had been in some of those countries since literally in the 1950s. We opened up the Caribbean. And then in the 60s and 70s, we opened up Great Britain and Ireland and Australia, and other countries were added. And then by the time that I'm talking about now with Mike Kitchen, we started to think about some of the developing countries of the world, like the communist bloc that was starting to open up over in Eastern Europe. Our former CEO back in the 90s, before Mike Kitchen, was a gentleman by the name of Dr. Hines. He personally wrote the loan to the Polish credit union movement to help fund that movement, and that was run by a gentleman by the name of Grzegorz Borecki, who was in the jail cell with Lech Walesa in Poland when the communist wall was being brought down. And that loan that Doc Hines wrote to the Polish credit union movement helped to build that movement. So I'm trying to tell you a story on how important some of the leadership out of Madison became to get the developing countries around the world involved with credit unions. And so that became really an important part of my job. And as we started to build those credit union movements, we relied on league marketing agreements to do that. And when I use the term league marketing agreement, again, we looked at leagues not only to do political advocacy, which CUNA Mutual and CUNA helped to fund and lead, particularly Dan MICUH leading on the political advocacy side, but we were also looking to provide money from our insurance products to help credit unions develop, not only internationally, but domestically. An important thing that was happening back then was teaching credit unions to cross-sell products. Back in the 50s, 60s, and early 70s, they just had loans and shares. Now they had credit cards and mortgages, share drafts, and so on that needed to be cross-sold. And we needed to teach credit unions how to do that. That was important for CUNA Mutual because CUNA Mutual at the time was the largest credit insurer in the world. But instead of selling it to a credit union for all of its members, we needed to sell it to each individual member in the credit union to make the model work. And so it was incumbent upon us and CUNA to teach credit unions how to cross-sell loans. And we did that. And then we took that model and we tried to take it around the world to various developing countries. A story I like to tell is about Romania. We worked with World Council to look at opening up a credit union movement in Romania. And at the time, there was 4,000 cooperatives in Romania, very small cooperatives. They were called CARIs, and they worked on a very simple premise called the multiple system, where if you saved, say, $100 in Romania, you could get a $100 loan from that credit union. Very different than what happens today, where if you're a member of a credit union, you get a loan for $10,000. So this is a smaller time Romania trying to build a movement. And they felt that they needed to bring insurance product to that movement so that they could evolve beyond shares and loans, much like the American credit unions evolved beyond shares and loans in order to grow their business. And what we had done in America and what we had taken to Great Britain and Ireland and so on was for every dollar of premium that we sold, we gave the leagues 5% of that money to help develop the movement. They would use that for political advocacy in order to get enabling legislation for credit unions to grow, to teach credit unions how to cross-sell. And so the CUNA Mutual insurance products and investments became very important enablers to make credit unions prosper, grow, and cross-sell. So CUNA Mutual, as an insurance company, really became an integral part of that credit union system to help growth and so on around the world. I'm going to close with a couple stories, some history lessons based on this, on kind of this model I've talked about. When I was in Romania, I was asked by MICUH, our CEO, to go around the countryside to talk to some of the territory leaders. So picture a league president in the United States, that would be a territory leader in Romania, to see if they had the distribution know-how to take our products and begin to sell them throughout Romania. So I was working with a staff from MICUH, and we had a translator, Georgetta, and we hopped in the car and we drove around Romania. Which is a beautiful country around the Transylvanian Mountains and the Carpathian Mountains. And I had an opportunity to talk to a couple of the leaders, and there was one leader in particular that intrigued me. He was an older gentleman. I met him in a town actually it was a city, smaller city, about 100 miles northeast of Bucharest. And as we were pulling into that city, it was basically an old communist steel town that was trying to evolve away from communism. And I remember driving into that town, and there was this huge, huge pile of slag, steel slag, that was smoldering on the side of the town. And this thing was like 2-3 miles long and a half a mile wide. And I'm thinking as I'm driving past this thing, boy, the environmental fallout of living near something like that's just got to be awful. These poor people. And so we got into town, and the people really didn't look that healthy living in that kind of environment. And so you're thinking, boy, what can we do to help these people? And of course, nothing I wanted to do more than was to be able to get a credit union movement up and going in Romania. So I sat down with the territory leader, and he was an older gentleman, and I explained to him the business model that had helped credit unions and CUNA Mutual grow throughout the world. And our model was very simple. We were the #1 credit insurer in the world. And what the best thing about our product is that we had a 60% benefit ratio. That means for every dollar that you spend in premium, 60 cents is going to come back to you in terms of a credit insurance claim. That was much higher than our competition, almost double. We were pretty proud of that. But I drew a pie diagram for him, and I said, now this 60% here, that's the benefit, the claim ratio. That's what goes to the member. That's what makes this product so good. And there's a 20% piece of this pie that is involved for administrating the product, to run the product. There's a 10% return that comes to CUNA Mutual. That's what we get in our return for putting the capital up to do this. And then there's 10% that goes to the league. 5% to help you develop your credit unions, and 5% to spend on marketing and promotion. Well, he sat back and he looked at that model, and now this is through a translator. He said to me, not enough money. And I said, what do you mean not enough money? Where is there not enough money? And he pointed to the 5% that the league was going to get for their work and another 5% for the promotion. I said, well, that's 10%. That's a lot of money for you. We've built the credit union movement around the world using this exact model. Why would that not work for you? And he shook his head, and the translator pointed at the 60% piece of that claims ratio, that largest piece of pie, and he said, I want that. And I said, well, you can't have that. That doesn't make the program work. There's going to be no value to your member. He shook his head and said, no, you don't understand. I'm not concerned about value to the member. I'm concerned about the money I get. I came back to Madison, sat down with Mike Kitchen, and I said, I ran into a former communist boss. And I had heard through the grapevine who this gentleman was. And Mike was kind of ticked off, all that time and money trying to get this thing to go. And he said, I want to talk to him. And we flew him over to Madison. He was in Mike Kitchen's office for about an hour. Mike called me up and said, send him back. It's not going to work. Now, I tell you that story because with all the success that we had around the world building a credit union movement through CUNA and leagues and CUNA Mutual, there's a lot of hard work underneath the covers. And as you get into third world countries, it's very, very difficult to get the credit union legislation that you need, and also, and probably most importantly, to deal with corruption. That gentleman was corrupt, and we were not going to work with him. So that's a strategic decision we made, and it's actually, quite frankly, something that affects trying to develop credit unions around the world. I'm going to close with one more story. I had the opportunity to work in the Caribbean. I spent a lot of time in the Caribbean, and when I'm sitting here in Madison, Wisconsin today in 14-degree weather, you can imagine being in the Caribbean in January is a pretty nice place to be.
Absolutely.
And I was working down in Port of Spain, Trinidad. Port of Spain was one of our 3 offices that we had in the Caribbean. We had one in Kingston, Jamaica, one in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and down in Port of Spain. And Port of Spain is just right off the coast of Venezuela. And I met in a credit union there as I was out meeting these credit union leaders and trying to teach them how to cross-sell insurance product. I met this impoverished little lady who had some pretty dirty young children, 2 of them in tow, and she was impoverished. And I looked at that, and much like Romania, I said, God, we really need to be able to help these people out. And she was in that credit union that day. This was 1993. She was in there getting what we call today a micro enterprise loan. For her, it was just a loan for a sewing machine, but it was the sewing machine that was going to feed her children. And so I took that story and that image, what I call a moment of truth. I took that back to Madison, and I got up and literally in front of our entire company at one of our forums and told them that story. And I said, that is what we meaning CUNA Mutual, CUNA, leagues, the World Council of Credit Unions, that is what we're about. We're about people helping people. And down there in Trinidad, we were literally helping that woman survive. Now, fast forward 1993, 2005, 2008, about that time, the Nobel Peace Prize award went to an Asian Indian philanthropist for doing what? For making micro enterprise loans for sewing machines to impoverished women in India. So what does that say? It says that we've been doing this for 100 years or more. And we are a green industry, an industry that I think we're all very proud of, and one that I know I'm certainly proud to have been a part of.
Absolutely. I could listen to you tell these stories all day, Don.
Thank you.
But I will say, I think I probably speak for many of us within the credit union movement that we are truly thankful that you picked CUNA Mutual and not hot dogs.
So am I.
So thank you for sharing a little bit of your credit union history. I know there's more stories to tell there, and we'll probably circle back and get some more. But thank you for being part of Moments in Credit Union History here at the museum.
I enjoyed it. Thank you, Stephanie.
Thank you.